Welcome to Invest Out West podcast. I'm Nat Micken.
And I'm Carlia Micken. We are a husband and wife team who live and invest in Western Queensland.
Join us on our journey of creating passive income through mindset, business, crypto, and property investing. Welcome to Invest Out West episode number 45.
The quote we'd like to leave with today comes from Warren Buffett, where he says, "Risk comes from not knowing what you're doing."
In Robert Kiyosaki's book, The Cash Flow Quadrant, chapter 13 starts off with saying, know the difference between risk and risky. Then it says, business and investing are not risky, but being undereducated is. So it got us thinking about risk and what is risk. It's a topic that we could sort of talk about all day and still not get to the bottom of because it's such a big area. It's such a big area of investing, a big area of life in general. And just to put a quick Google search, what is risk? The AI overview says, risk, in its simplest form, is the possibility of something bad happening. And I don't reckon that there's any better way of describing risk than just that AI overview, because that's basically all that it is a you're really sort of weighing up the possibility of is something bad going to happen to me, and is there a bigger chance of that happening than something good happening? When we sort of like look at it is in an investing sense, there's so many people that sort of just are that frightened of risk that it just sort of paralyzes them from doing anything with their money, like making their money grow or becoming more financially free. It stops them, like risk stops them from making those sort of decisions that are needed to make those changes in their lives. And there's another quote that says the biggest risk is not taking any risk. So it's like that bit that I just read out in Robert Kiyosaki's book about know the difference between risk and risky. It's more a case of minimising the risk and maximising the upside, and just still being aware that there definitely is the possibility of something going very wrong and things not working out how we planned, which leads us to failure, because failure is something that's taught in schools, and that failure is meant to be avoided at all costs. And like in school, like when you fail at a an exam or whatever, it's about the worst possible outcome that you could have in an exam is to fail it. Whereas in real life, we only learn through our failures, and we learn from making those failures, from going through those failures, and then not making those mistakes again. And failure is okay as long as you do it again, you learn from those mistakes, and you do it right the next time. It's basically a numbers game where if you were going to do something 10 times and you failed 4 out of those 10 times, then you're still in front. As long as you kept going and didn't just stop at the first failure. And risk, it seems to be like risk, fear, and failure are sort of 3 words that are used together. I think fear seems to stem back from back when we were living in caves, and you had the constant risk of coming into contact with a a lion or a tiger or something, and you had to be always fearful of that risk. I think modern day living has seemed to have sort of changed. Like, it's definitely changed our perspective of how we live, and yet we still have that fear of risk. Fear is simply only a self-preservation tool, and it's definitely good in certain, like, as far as it goes. But if it's left unchecked and just to left to just take over us, then it's really it really hamstrings us no end, because it doesn't let us reach our full potential. So yeah, it's the fear of losing what we had is probably the main thing, is what we associate with risk. Um, just a quick story. There's an fairly older fella that I know, and I talk to him now and again, and he was asking me the other day. He said, "Oh, how's your Bitcoin going?" And I said, "Yeah, going good. Everything's on track." And he said, "Oh no," he said, that's too much risk for me." He said, "I could never do that." And he said, I'm just a very I'm a play it safe kind of a fella." And it sort of made me think about that, and I sort of thought to myself, well, how's that really played out for you? Because this fella doesn't really have much. He really, he's worked hard all his life, and he really has ended up with nothing towards the end of his life. And here he is saying that he's been too scared of risk. And it sort of makes me think about, those sort of quotes like, the biggest risk is not taking any risk. And yeah, I think it's definitely something that that we need to really think about. Um, in like it's the fear factor of the risk is what we're most concerned about, and fear of unknowing, fear of losing what we had. And I think we really need to sort of consider risk as something that's manageable, and it's not a case of just racing in and just doing whatever you like and thinking it's all gonna come out well. It's more a case of going into something eyes wide open, doing your research, knowing what you're going into, and that way you've minimised the downside and maximised the upside. There's a book that I like. It's called U Squared by Price Pritchett. And Price Pritchett, I think it's how it's pronounced. And it's called U Squared, so it's just a U with a number 2 after it. It's only a small book, but he's just got just small chapters in there. None of the chapters are numbered, but there's a chapter in the book that's called Choose a Different Set of Risks. And it starts, well, it's got a part of that chapter that says, you've got to understand that you can never escape risk. It's not something you can decide to live with or without. Something is always at stake. You can only decide which risks to take. It says then, whether you choose to go for the quantum leap or to follow your usual routines, you are putting something on the line, so choose carefully, and don't kid yourself with the idea that playing it safe by living with the status quo gives you the best odds. That may be the surest way of losing. End quote. And yeah, I really like that as well, because it sort of fits in with like a lot of the teachings of Robert Kiyosaki. He sort of often talks about how that those who have the least to lose or usually have the biggest fear of risk, and it's oftentimes it's because of their fear of risk is that they don't have much. So it's sort of like a vicious circle. There's another thing that's just come to me is another quote: "Getting rich is hard. Being broke is hard, so choose your hard." And I think it all sort of ties in with the whole risk factor. because I sort of look at it as I'd rather put risk now, and when I'm still sort of young and able, rather than have nothing in the future, and still be working at 70, or you even see some people working when they're nearly 80, simply because they simply haven't taken the necessary risks back in their early days to sort out their own financial freedom. So yeah, I thought we'd just do this podcast about risk, because it's something that I've been thinking about for a little while, and it's definitely something that needs to be thought about, and we need to be very aware of it. Otherwise, if we're not aware of it, then it'll definitely take us over without us even knowing. I might hand over to Carlia now. Do you have more to add on that?
Yeah, so just as Nat's been speaking here, I've just been thinking of like what does risk really mean? And if we let it become part of our story, then that's what controls our life. But my thoughts were, if you consider children, for example, especially those who are just getting to the stage of being toddlers, they're trying to find their feet, they're trying to walk around. Well, that they're not considering the risk of what it means to try and stagger up onto their feet and take their first steps. The risk has no part whatsoever in the natural process of learning to walk. And I think it's just a really good example that like risk, like it has its place, but it doesn't need to have a controlling place. And even too, when you think of kids as they're growing up, probably more so bush kids specifically these days, but they're out there, they're climbing trees and they're mucking around, and they've got no consideration whatsoever for the risk of falling out of a tree. Whereas us as adults will think, well, man, if I slip out of this tree, I'm done for. And so I just thought it was a really good concept, of the position that risk has. And when you don't allow it to be a factor, it means absolutely nothing. There's a really good quote from Napoleon Hill that I like, and I often look at this regularly and write it down and sort of make it part of our story. And it says, every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. And that's it, no matter what we're doing. As Nat's just said from that book, that U² book, it doesn't matter what we're doing, there's always a risk that comes with it. No matter what part of life, is not specific to, investing and to wealth building, but it's across every aspect of life. Every risk we go through has a seed of equal or greater benefit. And this is the thing, like when we start talking about what we're doing, to people who are around us, quite often you'll hear the response, like, oh, that's just too much for me. Nat shared the story of the older fella that we know, but there's another story of even like a younger fella who Nat's is good mates with, and his words to Nat after we had a big in-depth discussion about what we were doing was he was sort of pointing to regret, where he said, I haven't taken enough risk, and it's a really sad thing to hear when you hear of somebody who is in sort of what you'd call the second stages of their life, I suppose, coming to the realization that, time's running out and risk has really, controlled, controlled their decision making. And like the thing really is that like risk isn't about being reckless. That's not what it's about. It's just about, I guess, peeling the layers back and understanding what's beneath it. So then you can understand how to manage that. Risk isn't there to stop us from doing anything, but it's simply there to be asked, well, why is there risk there, and to continue to peel them layers back. And I think from a human nature point of view, the first thing that comes to mind with risk is the risk of social failure. I think that's the biggest fear that most people have around risk, because if they go out there and they risk something, for example, put some investment, like we often talk about investing into cryptocurrency, is classed as a high risk asset. People will then say, well, I invested, so much of my wealth into crypto and I lost it all. Well, of course, their biggest fear is the risk to their own social standing. And it's what we see so often. People just can't seem to handle the pressure that comes with risk. But from my personal perspective, so once Nat and I started down this journey, of building wealth and of even tapping into different asset classes, then specifically crypto, when we got into that, what I learned was that I think risk has to become your best friend, because what I learned when I started to embrace the risk, and when I started to understand the responsibility that come with risk, that's where I found a lot more freedom. In the cryptocurrency space, everything is back to us as the individuals. So that, like, there's no banks, there's no middleman, there's no one to run to if some mistake has happened. And I found when I understood the risk of that as such, like it's termed as a risk in the eyes of normies, but when I understood the potential that was behind that risk, it brought in massive freedom, because once we become responsible, we embrace the risk, and it's not it ends up not being a risk at all. It ends up being an opportunity, and so there's so much to this topic, and like I suppose we could talk all day about the different risks, but there's another point that I wanted to make, and it's sort of something that we focus on a lot, and it's focused around that the entire point of life is to take chances on dreams that seem crazy to most, but feel like destiny to you. And this is exactly the thing. We're not here to please the Joe Blow down the road. We're not here to please our best friends. We're here to do what's best for us. And if that means embracing risk in whatever form it comes into your life, and that's, from my opinion, is what we should be doing. And just one last comment, one last closing comment from me is, I often say this to people, is that you don't want to go to the grave thinking I should have, I could have, I would have, because those three lines, shoulda, coulda, woulda, are often what people say. I should have done this, or I could have done that, or I would have done that, and that's not something that you want to face, in your last days. And so as we stand today, being young and embracing the concept of risk, we're striving every day to do what we can while we're young and while we've got the opportunity before us. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking of when Carly was just talking about that, that Gary Vaynerchuk often says that we all should really go and spend some time at an old people's home. And be around old people, because there's a lot of regret that they talk about, and so it definitely can be used as a wake-up call to the rest of us that are still able to go out there and take a bit more risk and do that thing that you really wanted to do, even though that it feels scary at the time, because that is something that I don't want to feel later on in life, is the regret of saying, oh well, I wish that I had have done that, because I had the opportunity, and I think there is a lot of people out there, sadly, that are like that. They've just they've let fear hold them back, and they just they're at the end of their life saying, well, I wish that I had have done that. And it's definitely a wake up call. I think this topic, it's something that I like to sort of think about every now and again, because I'm just human like everybody else. I have incredible fear about doing new things, and talking to people and that sort of thing. Like, talking to people is probably one of the hardest things that I struggle with. It's it's just, and I know it's just the fear holding me back. But oftentimes, you'll go and talk to somebody, and I procrastinate and all the rest of it, and then eventually I'll get the courage to go and talk to somebody and meet this person, and then next thing we've got a really good relationship going on, and you say, well, that was a lot easier than I thought, and it's just it's just the whole risk factor again. We've all got it, and it's all trying to hold us back, and it's all about self-preservation. But it really needs to be put in its place. Otherwise, it can hold you back and be worse off for you. So, that's really all I got on this one. I think. Did you have more to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, like, this is it. I think risk is simply it's emotional, because a lot of people can't, like, I shouldn't say can't, but a lot of people struggle to get past the emotional impact that risk has on their life, and even like from a personal point of view, there's a saying that we know so much in this space that we're in, where it says it's none of my business what somebody else thinks of me. And that's sort of the mindset that we've got to have with every decision that comes across our path. So whether that be, buying into cryptocurrency or property, or, investing into some business, or even doing things in everyday life, the likes of posting on social media, and from our perspective, recording this podcast, it's taken a lot of courage, and we've been through a lot of the fear traps trying to produce this podcast. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you start with the thought of, well, it's none of my business what somebody else thinks of me, then that sort of squashes any risk that comes with that. And even for myself, personally, I do a lot of social media posting, and there's always that question, what's Joe Blow going to think of this if they see this, But ultimately, if to squash out that risk is to say, well, too bad for them. They can think what they like. The risk is mine to embrace. So yeah, that's just sort of what I wanted to close with, and just sort of I just encourage people that if you are facing something that you would term as risky, then to really process that and understand whether it is a strategic risk or whether it's more of an emotional risk and like a fear, like the social risk, the fear of what others would say, think and do, around you then.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to finish up with a poem that I like this episode, but it just made me think, just when Carly was talking there, just again there now, about risk. Like I said at the start, we could talk all day about this topic and still not get to the bottom of it, but some of the podcasts we listen to, especially like property podcasts, and we sort of listeners to this podcast know where we invest property wise, and it's really sort of out of the ordinary for most property investors, and it's something that I've often talked about and had arguments with different people over, because most people think that you can only invest in the capital cities and all the rest of it, and a lot of their arguments is, it's too risky invest in out west or inland Australia, or off the coast or out of the capital cities, wherever the most of the property investors invest in. They say it's too risky to invest in those areas. But the thing that I've always said is that because we live in this area, we know this area, we understand this part of the world. And so to us, it's the least amount of risk possible, because we know what type of town would be the best type to invest in. We know, all the different demographics because we live and breathe this area. But to a city dweller, they have no sort of idea of what to look out for. So they are right in saying that it's too risky. But what they're really trying to say is that it's too risky for them. Whereas for us, if we were to go and invest in the city, for instance, buy residential property in the city, well, we wouldn't have a clue what we were sort of looking at, because we're not in that environment. It's definitely a case of minimising your risk by knowing what you're doing, which goes back to a lot of those quotes that I was talking about, and even the one Carly said, Warren Buffett himself, who said that risk only comes from not knowing what you're doing. It's definitely a case of being aware of the risks, and actively minimizing the risks through what you know. So so I just wanted to finish up now with this poem that I really liked. I thought it was probably a good way to finish this episode off. The poem is called My Wage by Jesse Rittenhouse. It goes, I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening, when I counted my scanty store. For life is a just employer, he gives you what you ask, but once you have set the wages, why, you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn dismayed, that any wage I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid. That's it for this episode, and keep living the dream.